Remember in Dawn of War campaign? I think it was like the 5th mission called Winter Assault. You're playing on a map that has a dead Titan in it. And that Titan's gun is just laying there, and periodically it fires, carving a trench through the ground. And so you have to time your movements to get through the trench before it fires again, or else it insta-kills anything in there. We like that mission here at EonsBattle, and we decided to do that. A lot of our Warhammering is inspired by Dawn of War. My Black Templar have been fighting Nyx's Blue Orcs for about 200 years. There's already a dead strike cruiser on our terrain board, and now there's gonna be a dead Black Templar Titan. Well, technically Legio Titanicus ally, but still a Titan. Here at EonsBattle, we make monthly terrain packs, and this Titanic monstrosity is our terrain pack for June. What better way to show off that a battle is serious business than a god machine already dead on the ground? These parts are exploded in such a way to create some good line of sight blocking and ruin terrain, perfect for grimdark games, and also classing up a game board with one enormous casualty. With a Titanic rigor mortis claw, silent cannon, and lifeless eyes, this beast won't be doing much but looking pretty while those who are still kicking win the day. All this terrain was designed by us and is available at EonsOfBattle.com. For this project, we went with FDM printing. FDM is getting really good. The detail is nice and crisp, and the parts are very light and strong. For sticking the parts together, I think superglue would probably hold, but I have to remember that Sean can break anything, so I decided to go with 2-part epoxy. JB Quick Weld 6-minute epoxy. I've used a lot of epoxies, and this is the only one I like. I lathered up the 2 halves and then squished them together. This fills in the gaps and leaves me with super strong bonds. The parts are all cleaned and prepped and glued, and so they're ready for painting, and the layer lines are so fine, I don't need to do any sanding. It's just gonna be right on to the first step, which is giving them a coat of filler primer. And boom, they're all primed. This stuff is basically thick paint, but since it goes through the rattle can, it goes on pretty evenly, and it does a really good job of hiding the layer lines. And the layer lines were pretty hard to notice already, and so now they're almost gone. With the primer on there, it's time to give them a base coat, but for the base coat, I'm gonna give them a coat of metallic paint. It'll all make sense in the end. Shiny is now on there. It's actually really hard to buy metallic spray paint. I have these 2 cans. I ended up going with this one, but for some reason, the caps on metallic spray paint are never correct. Like this one kind of has a glittery pearly cap, but it's just a very nice aluminum color. And this one has a mirror finish cap, but it is not a mirror finish, it's just a slightly brighter aluminum. I went with the brighter aluminum. This guy is super shiny right now, but by the end, it'll probably be like 10% this shiny. I'm gonna start out with the most important spot, his crotch. When this Titan died, he took a tumble and now is laying flat with his leg snapped off. The shiny spray paint will be the base for all his mechanical bits. The only stuff I really need to paint are the armors. I'm gonna be doing the weathering first. I want lots of paint chips, and to do this, I started out by tearing off little pieces of painter's tape and then laying them down onto the armor panels, trying to match up with the physical damage in the sculpt. I find starting with the tape is really important. I have a hard time getting the liquid mask peeled up when I apply it in large sections, and it's good to start making decisions on what I want the battle damage to look like. The tape directs me on what the rest of this spot of damage will look like, and I can build off of it to make deliberate looking damage. I poured out some liquid mask onto a playing card and then dipped in a piece of sponge. I sponged the liquid silicone onto the mini, following the shape of the tape, and I went back in with a disposable brush and painted this over the edge of the tape. This keeps any paint from slipping under the tape and gives the edge of the tape a nice uneven shape. I brushed on some more silicone to connect some of the sponge chips to make them bigger, and now I can put down some paint. I put some dark red into my airbrush and sprayed this on. Luckily, the trim gives me some room between the armor I want red and the machinery I don't, so I can just base coat these pieces quickly and carefully. Where it was a little bit too risky, I used a playing card and some silly putty to make sure I didn't spray anything I didn't want to. After a base coat of dark red, I put a darker red into my airbrush and sprayed this all around the edge of each armor panel. Then to finish off the red, I sprayed some bright saturated red in the middle of each section. Now his armor is red, but I don't just want a solid red Titan. I want some dark navy on this guy too. Knights usually have some pretty crazy heraldry. I grabbed some more painter's tape and laid this over the red. I didn't press too hard on the tape, I don't want it to really stick and peel off the red paint. I cut his crotch in half so it was 50-50 blue and red, and for his knee, I got a little fancy with it. I cut some thin strips of painter's tape and laid these across his legs so he has a fun racing stripe. Titans probably move faster than you'd think. Each stride is very long. Once the navy layer was finished, there was a lot of layers of tape. I peeled these all away, revealing the shiny silver underneath. Then I took a piece of dried silicone and rubbed this over the paint. This silicone catches in all the little bits and pulls them off, revealing some extremely realistic paint scratches. I really love this style of paint chipping because it's real paint chipping. Like the paint is chipping off with the liquid silicone, and the best way I've found to get it off is to keep a little booger of dried silicone. I have this booger, which is every bit of excess silicone I've ever had, and I protect this with my life because this is a really fun way to do paint chipping. With the paint on there, I finished off all the armor with some gold, painting this over all the trim. I used a good sized brush for this. I always try and use the biggest brush I can use accurately to save myself some time. I found that in a few spots, the metallic spray paint was so shiny it was hydrostatic, and the gold paint was beating up over it. This kinda made a cool look though, that matched the paint chip, so I left it as is and kept going, finding all the gold. I gave the gold a dry brushing with silver paint. If the armor paint is this weathered, it makes sense that a lot of the gold is rubbed off. Then I sprayed the whole thing down with some gloss varnish. This is important. The acrylic paint layer is fragile, and if you don't varnish, it'll all wash away after the next step. A poor man's oil wash. I mixed some cheap craft paint, black and burnt umber, with some water to make some wet, soupy paints, and then I took an old ratty brush and started lathering this all over the model. A big splash of black, and then a big splash of brown, and then mixing them together on the Mini. I worked this into every nook and cranny, and then once it was on there, I came in with a wet piece of paper towel and rubbed this off. It rubbed right off the larger sections, and then stuck around in all the joints. This is exactly what an oil wash is like, but why use a lot of expensive stinky oils when I can get the same look with a few pennies worth of craft paint? That is a good looking crotch. Very regal, and now for his foot. I used a lot of painter's tape to mask off the areas I don't want to get airbrushed, and then did the same thing, pre-chipping the legs with small tears of painter's tape. Then I did the same reds, prepping the foot for some more racing stripes. I don't know why I used scissors before to cut these thin strips. It took like 3 tries to get a section even enough. This time I used an X-Acto and a ruler to quickly slice off a perfect little length, and I wrapped this over the foot and gave it a spray of dark navy, and to brighten it up, I mixed white into the dark navy. This brightens it up without bringing in any more blue. This dark navy really is black, but black should never really be black. Black paint is boring, you gotta do a little something extra. Peeling up the paint layers is really satisfying. So often with the Mini, I'm really fighting with the paint to get what I want. This process just works in steps, do everything in order, and it all works out. After some more gold trim, I lathered this foot up in craft paint too. I like to work in little sections at a time, putting it on and then wiping it off and then repeating. This helps to make it a little bit less messy and also lets me see how I like the dirtiness and if any spots need a second coat to get it just the right amount of filthy. I got his crotch and leg done, and he is looking bad, which is looking good because he is supposed to be dead on the battlefield. The battlefield of my Black Templars army. And my Black Templar crusade has been fighting Nyx blue orcs for about 200 years now, and it's all part of my army's lore. Back in my early days of Warhammer, when I was done playing with my Necrons, I wanted to start another army, and I decided on Space Marines. And I didn't really know anything about Space Marines, or even much about 40k, because the Necrons are pretty separate from the rest of Warhammer 40,000. And so my first try with Space Marines was, I was gonna have them be a no-name chapter. It was just gonna be a bunch of Space Marines who were so weathered that their armor no longer displayed any paint or markings, and all that they had was a bunch of trophies of Tyranid bits, because my neighbor collected Tyranid and he gave me all the bits. That was my original vision for Space Marines. But when I started painting that, the story sounded kind of cool, but it didn't lead to very interesting looking miniatures. So I decided to take another look at like the world of Warhammer to see what I wanted to do with Space Marines. And that led me to the Black Templars. My favorite thing about the Imperium side of Warhammer 40,000 was the Imperium of itself, the Administratum, the Inquisition, the Officio Assassinorum, all of the horrible like bureaucracy going on was so grim and dark. And the grimmest and darkest and most aligned with that are the Black Templars, which is kind of funny because they're also the most rebellious chapter, but they're rebellious in all the wrong ways. Like they're gonna do whatever they want, but they were always at the beck and call of the Imperium. Down to the fact that they're a crusade and not a chapter, which is like a sneaky way around the rules. When Space Marine chapters are on crusade, they kind of don't have to follow the rules. They kind of can, or they're allowed to do whatever they want to get the job done. Now the Black Templar have been crusading for the last 10,000 years, and it doesn't look like they're gonna be stopping anytime soon. And so they kind of do whatever they want, but they do whatever the Imperium wants. They are totally on board for whatever the Imperium has in store. And so the Battle Brothers that make up my crusade noticed a planet, a barren desert planet that is full of orcs. And so they've decided to stop and launch a full-scale war against these orcs to the point where spaceships and titans are laying dead on the battlefield. And one day, they will be victorious over Nyx blue orcs. And at that point, they'll pack up and leave, having accomplished absolutely nothing. It would have been so much better if they had just left this planet to the orcs and moved on to something more pressing. But no, They're not going to suffer the alien to live. They are going to wipe the planet of orcs, and they're going to expend any resource necessary to see that it happens. And that, in my opinion, is very grim and dark, and that's just my headcanon for my Black Templar. Now that his lower half is done, it's time to move up and hit some of these weapons. The cannon and the fist. These turned out really well in FDM, but to be perfect, we usually go with resin printing, and our favorite resin is Tech resin, the very best quality 3D printing resin out there. And we have a code if you guys want to try it for yourself. Use EonsOfBattle to get 8% off your order of Fast Navy Gray. With these, I was debating on adding in some new colors. Titan Heraldry can be anything, but to keep everything coherent, I decided to give them the same red and navy treatment on the rest of the Titan. After more tape and silicone, I hit these spots with some red, and I decided to mix things up a little bit for the pattern. His crotch is 50-50, I think some smaller checkers would look good on the gun. I carefully cut some painter's tape into little squares and then laid these onto the armor. After the first square, I lightly placed down a second right next to it so I can get the spacing accurate. After that, I can just eyeball it, laying down the rest of the squares so that they're all corner to corner. This is how you do checkerboarding, but usually minis are too small and too detailed to actually physically mask off each square. I sprayed on the navy, doing a few thin coats to get full coverage, and then a dusting of a lighter navy, and then it was time to demask. Those are some crispy chipped squares. After doing the gold on the trim, I decided that these vents could use gold too. These vents are actually on the bottom. The whole gun is upside down. I decided to do some stripes around the edge of the barrel. I wrapped painter's tape, leaving me with 2 stripes shown, and I threw a lot of sponging of silicone over this so that it'll be even more weathered, from the heat of the barrel and the deadness of the Titan. After a coat of white paint, I ripped off all the masking to reveal some very weathered stripes. Now that the paint's on there, I started lathering up the gun with craft paint, and here I forgot to varnish. The wet paint reactivated the acrylic, making them incredibly fragile, and most of the checkers on the top part rubbed off. I guess this spot is a little extra battle damaged. I paused, varnished, and then continued getting the grip pass on there. Now for his little fist, which isn't very little. There isn't a lot of room, and I think some navy sections would clutter up the look, so I just left it red and moved right on to finishing it up, remembering to varnish this time. I'm not losing any more paint. The weapons of this behemoth are done, the Bellicose Volcano Cannon and the Ayark Power Claw. These, if you can believe it, the Titan weapons are pretty much the absolute limit of power level in the game of Warhammer 40,000, although the Volcano Cannon only does 18 damage. The fist does a much more respectable 24. Those profiles are ridiculous, but honestly, having a number attached to them still kind of makes them feel underpowered. Like, the profile probably should read, if the Titan shoot, the bad guy die. These weapons are absolutely titanic, although they're attached to a dead guy, which kind of makes you wonder what the orcs are working with. I painted them up in the colors of Legio Honorum, kind of by accident. I just picked what looked good, and red, gold, and a little bit of, I guess, navy trim. It should be black, but I wanted to throw a little color in there. And so while this guy was alive, he was marching with the Black Templar. And to represent this, the flag is calling my name. I used some silly putty to mask off his flag, and I sprayed it with some actual black paint. Then I dusted it from above with my navy color, and then just a few squirts of a light gray. Letting the airbrush do this is the easiest way to paint cloth. Now to bedazzle this banner, and I'm going to be putting on a shield, a campaign badge. I used this peel and stick stencil to leave me with a shield-shaped hole in my masking, and then dusted on some gray. I have another little section for the ribbon, and I put this underneath the shield and then went and grabbed some Templar symbols from the Black Templar decal sheet. I squished these into place, the Crusade symbol right in the middle, flanked by 2 little shield badges. Now to add some Gothic lettering, I grabbed this Impatient Tabletop Numbers Volume 3 decal sheet that is one of the decal sheets available at EonsOfBattle.com. I cut out numbers 8, 6, and 9. The Titan Legion Legio Honorum is from Esteban 8, and he's marching with my Crusade, the 69th. With the badges on there, I went ahead and free-handed some text onto the ribbon. I think something nice and uplifting for my battle brothers to see and be inspired by. I wrote down, hate. Once all that was on there, I hit the banner with a coat of varnish to protect the script, and then threw on a coat of mud, dirtying this up like the rest of the body. And to get a little more splatter on there, I used some sponging to get the banner looking very grimy. With all the weapons done, it's time for the man himself, the face of this Titan. I don't have a name for him yet. To me, he looks like a Bob. Titan Bob. For his coloring, I can continue the checkering on his crotch, and then for his shoulder, I'm going with a split down the middle, half red and half navy. And for his dome, I'm thinking navy. After giving him the tape and paint treatment, hitting him with the red and the navy, I picked out all the trim with gold, and he was looking mighty colorful. Now for the grime. This is the biggest chunk of Titan, and I switched to my biggest brush to really work the paint into the cracks, wiping it away with some wet paper towels. It's really fun to clean up this Titan. It's a lot more like working on some cosplay props than a miniature. I was thinking about what to do with his eyes. I was thinking maybe having a little bit of a glow to show he's barely grasping at life, but he's pretty messed up. I decided to give him black lenses. Nothing going on in there. With all the parts painted and dirty, I threw some burnt sienna ink into my airbrush and sprayed this along the bottom of each part to tint these areas a dirty brown. And in all the slag holes where he's been melted, I sprayed on some brown and wiped it away, and then went over these spots a second time with blue to show these parts of metal have gotten super hot. I am now the proud owner of half a Titan. I mean, I guess I have a Titan, I have Stompy, but now I have 1.5 Titans. And it's time to see what this guy looks like on the battlefield. A battlefield covered in the dead bones of Titans. It's very Jakku from Star Wars. Now, you might think battling amidst the dead remains of the most powerful things in 40k would demoralize a force, but not the Black Templars. It would just fill them with more righteous zeal. There's actually a Templar's vow I can take that gives my entire army a leadership 5-up, which I don't usually take, but it's silly that I can do it. Back in the Horus Heresy times, Titans would be deployed in giant battle formations of Titans, but now in 40k, since there's just less Titans to go around, usually it's like 1 or 2 or a very small handful, which doesn't help their odds because Titans actually need a ton of support or else they get picked apart. This Titan has fallen, and I like to think it wasn't like a gigantic orc mega gargant or mega structure, but it was just a giant wall of boys, all standing on each other's shoulders, and they just eventually managed to take down the Titan. And there's a little bit of evidence of that because this Titan is picked pretty clean. I bet the mechs are working on some fun stuff with all of these Titan bits. Although Dawn of War's dead Titan was a winter assault, my dead Titan is more of a desert destruction. All of this terrain is available at EonsOfBattle.com, and we also got some water slide decals. Now that I got the terrain done, I just need to put together more Black Templars. Thanks for watching.